Hello to all of YouTube, ThomastheSmallEngine here, back with another custom showcase video, and it's, wait, the title card says this is not what we're reviewing. It's not you. Or you. Or you. No, if you looked at the hint from my last video where I went over a ton of items, then you would have seen in the credits this little hint back there with a faceless Percy, Billy, and Rosie. That didn't quite tell you what I was doing, but here is the explanation. I did a custom, several actually, of the London, Brighton, and South Coast Railway E2 locomotives. And for any of you who know railway realism, this is the class of engines that Thomas, the main character, is based off of. If you'll remember from the 2015 special The Adventure Begins, where Thomas showcased his debut as a green engine with LBSCR livery, as I made a custom of earlier, he was in a teal green with the number 70. The actual London, Brighton, and South Coast Railway were painted a special sort of brown shade with yellow lining. And the actual E2's, there were only 10 of them ever made, and I created all of them. Though, if you'll notice, there are 7 of them there. And trust me, I did create the other 3, but those are not here right now for spoiler reasons, even though technically this entire video is a spoiler for the upcoming series I'm creating. The actual E2's were constructed in 1913 to 1916, and the numbering went from 100 to 109, as you can see on these individual ones here. And just another thing I did, because I painted the E2's brown, and the wheels had to come with, I decided to use Hero the Japanese Train's glossy wheels technique that I also used for my Merlin custom, and I thought it turned out pretty well. And if you'll take a look at this one here, this one is number 100, the first of the LBSCR E2's. And something you might guess, if you look back there, is that for this, these are not exactly my own original characters. Rather, I did this to highlight what the other users have done in creating original E2 characters. So I decided to maintain consistency with what I've seen from other OCs. So this one is Timothy. This is the character who appeared in Ghost Train: The Untold Story of Timothy, created by, I believe, Sam the Thomas Fan 2, where Timothy was the ghost engine who was in Percy's Ghostly Trick or Ghost Train. He was painted silver, and he was the original prototype for the E2's. Now, I don't know why the heck in that he had the extended side tanks on the number 107 if he's the prototype, but Diesel D199's parody, where it showed him having not having extended side tanks, excuse me, was clarification enough for me to just go with the number 100. And because the first batch of E2's in real life, the first 5, didn't have the extended side tanks, they were more square, I decided to sort of take a note from Ryan here, even though Ryan's not an E2, where it was just a big square, and I decided to apply that as the way for showing that there are no extended side tanks here. And the face I got from this Billy model that you saw in the scrap heap. And with the Timothy character, Sam the Thomas Fan 2 had his face all wrinkly and at times demonic, but there's really no way for me to replicate that, so I just went for the teeth, and it's a pretty close match with what happened with Timothy. The next of the E2 customs, in my lineup at least, is one that you can very obviously tell is a recreation of Enterprising Engine 93's Young Tucker. Because he created a character that was essentially Thomas, just painted red and with a modified face. I knew I was going to have to fit this somewhere, though there was a bit of a question as to where to put him in the line, since his character name is Young Tucker, and I've just put him as the second oldest of the E2 class. But one of the things that you might be able to see from all these over here is that I decided that for the faces, they were going to have a sort of progression. Like this one here with Billy's face. I decided that since it was going to lead into this face, which I'll get into next, that this would be a decent in-betweener, as it is a 2002 to 10 Thomas face. That it was a decent enough transition, and I didn't quite get the shade right, since it's a little too orange and not enough tan like Enterprising did. And as a recreation of Young Tucker, just in his primal form, it's fine. And this next one here, you might be saying, wow, really creative, ThomastheSmallEngine, you just put an 02 to 10 Thomas face on it, and then just called him number 102. This character was actually a thought brought up by GWR Studios named Reginald. In his Off the Rails goof video, he pointed out in one scene that there was a cap of a tank engine that appeared to have rusted up, and he, using some clips from Down the Mine, he created this idea that Reginald was first on the island of Sodor and had fallen into the ditch, and they didn't get him out in time, so he became waterlogged, died, and rusted up. The actual thing that happened in Off the Rails was that they used the pilot model of Thomas, which actually appeared in footage in Down the Mine, as that rusted up tank engine, because the pilot for the TV series was originally Down the Mine, but it didn't air, and that model was replaced by the one that we know and love from Season 1. Since both the actual model and GWR Studios' idea for Reginald were just Thomas, but a different character, I decided to just go with the 2002 to 2010 Thomas face. And I think I did a pretty good job on the detailing here. I mean, no custom is perfect, but I think compared to some of the others, it turned out pretty well. And this one here was the first of the second batch. Yeah, I skipped over 103 and 104 because spoilers. This is the first of the second batch, and the E2's didn't have those extended side tanks, but when they realized that there wasn't quite enough room for water, they ordered the second batch, number 105 to 109, with those extended tanks. That way they could hold more water. And ironically, the actual E2's then had a problem with coal, which is why they could only shunt. But this one here is number 105, has the extended side tanks, and with the sandbox and the face, you can probably guess that this is my Origins Thomas now. Replacing this is what I consider the past Thomas. Has some paint on the face, but whatever. The face I got from that, I believe it was a 2001, I don't know if you can see it or not. This is a 2001 Thomas that I've had since childhood, and if you saw in the collection video, this is that same face that had a zombie eye problem because I tried to fill them in manually when I was a kid, and it ended up with some very disastrous results. But for this custom, I decided to remove the zombie eyes and reapply it with finer hands. And it turned out a decent recreation of the 1995 to 2001 Thomas face. He's placed as number 105 because in Railway Series history, Thomas was reported to have arrived on Sodor in 1915. And since only number 105 and 106 were produced in that year, it was decided that this was probably number 105. The explanation for how Thomas ended up on Sodor was that due to World War I, he went missing and there was a mix-up and he ended up on Sodor. He stayed there, and bam, you've got the Railway Series. And you may have noticed from number 107, but none of the other E2s I painted with this little sandbox, because one of the real-life differences from an E2 and Thomas's character is that I think this is a sandbox, that's what I call it. It might be something else. But this sandbox here, Thomas has one of those and an actual E2 does not. So I decided to paint this on him just to give him a little bit more distinction, and I think it turned out nicely. And this one is yet another case of me trying to be consistent with other users' creations. This is number 106, an engine called Rhys. I think that's how you pronounce it, R-H-Y-S. It was created by a user named Engine number 14, where he created this train short of an E2 with Percy's face nearly being scrapped, but Douglas comes to rescue him, takes him back to Sodor, where he is painted green and given the number 14. From there, I'm not sure what happened. But with it also being a face taken from the Percy, as you saw here, I think this turned out quite good. This is number 106. The other E2 produced in 1915, but it's more likely that Thomas is number 105 because I doubt they would make a shipping mistake the second time as opposed to getting it right the first time. In real life, the E2s weren't shipped to the wrong place, but in this continuity of Thomas and Friends, it makes more sense for Thomas to be number 105. But enough of that, on to 107. And as you'll see here, this is a Mattel Rosie face with the blush and some of the freckles, except for the nose, removed. Like Rhys and number 108 over there, it doesn't have the sandbox. And this was taken from the 2011 Thomas that I had as you saw in the collection video. And it's a little straighter and pointier on the edges here. And now that I don't have to look at that face anymore, and I've put on Rosie's, this is the engine I created from it. And this isn't exactly a character that somebody came up with like the others. This is kind of my own thing. But in Sam the Thomas Fan 2's movie, Ghost Train: The Untold Story of Timothy, there was a line where Thomas mentioned he had brothers and sisters. And in the train world, siblings are ones that are essentially the same class. Since it was said that Thomas has brothers and sisters, I'd already thought up most of the E2 ideas, and I didn't have enough room for multiple sisters, but just to include one here, I created this, and I decided to call her Melody, just because it's a name that popped out of my head. It's not really a reference to anything. But I used this Rosie here's face, and I'm not really too fond of this Rosie's face, and I prefer this face, the original Rosie's face that I used for this Red Rosie custom, but I didn't really think this face was that much of a replica of Rosie's. The Thomas Wood face did better, but I prefer the old style for the Red Rosie custom, excuse me. But for this, I decided that it works here, and it's not really trying to replicate anything, and as Thomas's token sister, Melody passes just fine. And the last of the E2s that I can show here is E2 number 108. This was made from a 2017 Thomas that I purchased in stores, and you might say, why on earth would you use a Thomas face again? Well, I didn't exactly have original faces for all of them, but the reason that I used this one specifically and not, say, a 2013 to 2015 face was because, like I said, with the progression of faces, there is actually a reason that number 109 has that created a reason for me to use this 2017 face here. Once again, it's not a reference to anything. This one was completely thought up by me, but his name actually is a reference to a certain creator of the show. This engine is named Andrew. I can't show you 109, 103, or 104 because that would be giving spoilers for my series. I hope to produce that series, and these E2's probably will appear at some point, but not for very long since I don't really have original character ideas for all of them. While other users for their characters like Timothy and Young Tucker have created character identities for them, characters like Reginald and Andrew don't really have anything, so I don't know what to do with them. But as a model work, this did take me quite a while, mainly because it was such a tedious process to do it again and again and again and again and again, and you know that. You know that feeling. Like when you've written up an entire paper and then your computer crashes and you realize you didn't save and you just kind of don't want to do it again. That was sort of the feeling, and it took me a long time to get these done, but now that they are done, I consider them really cool costumes. They're not my best, but as a project, this was definitely a round of endurance. As another custom showcase, let the video end there. Goodbye.
The USA's were supplemented by 4 of the Brighton-class E2 tanks, which had a much longer wheelbase at 16 feet than the Americans at 10 feet. 32109 had arrived in November 1956.